Welcome to the History AI podcast, where the past comes alive with facts, anecdotes, and a dash of humor. Here are your hosts, Chuck and Marco.
Before we ride out into today's story, quick favor, hit subscribe wherever you're listening, and if you like this episode, leave us a 5-star review. It sounds small, but that 5-star rating helps the podcast grow and helps new listeners find us.
And if you're already subscribed, first of all, you're obviously a person of taste. Second, 5 stars, not 4, not I'll do it later. 5, like a proper Texas dawn, bright and decisive.
We also love hearing what you want next. Send topic suggestions to us on social media. And new merch is live. There's a link in the show notes. And yes, it's dangerously wearable.
Plus, you can listen to these anytime. Every episode is evergreen. No, you had to be there. No, this won't make sense next week. History's always relevant. People stay people. And stay tuned after the episode for the original song, Dust and the Deed.
All right, today we're talking about a man with a name that sounds like it belongs on a courthouse plaque and a saloon sign at the same time. Cicero Rufus Perry.
Cicero like the Roman statesman, Rufus like your friend's orange cat, and Perry like, well, Perry. It's a lot of name for one person.
And he somehow lived up to it. He's better remembered by a nickname, Old Rufe.
Which is the kind of nickname you don't give yourself. You earn that, usually by surviving something you shouldn't.
And that's the theme today, surviving things you shouldn't. If you've ever wondered what the Texas frontier did to people, or what kind of person the Texas frontier selected for, Old Rufe Perry is a perfect lens.
Also, a warning to our listeners, this episode contains scenes of violence, because the 1830s and 1840s Texas frontier did not come with safety rails, OSHA, or even the basic human concept of maybe don't.
Exactly. We're going to try to tell it with respect, but we're not going to sanitize it. Because Perry's life is a reminder that history isn't just dates, it's bodies, wounds, fear, and willpower.
But also banter. Because if we can't joke a little, the Comanche arrow to the temple is going to ruin the vibe.
Please don't make that the episode title.
Arrow to the temple, the vibes are ruined. I'm just saying, it would get clicks.
Let's start at the beginning. Perry was born in Montgomery, Alabama, in the early 1820s. Sources disagree on the exact year, one of those classic 19th century record issues. But the point is, he's born in the post-war of 1812 America, in a young country already expanding, already restless.
Translation. Paperwork was optional. You could show up and be like, I was born, sometime between maybe and don't ask me again.
By the time he's about 11, his family moves to Texas, settling around Bastrop. And I want to pause here because when people say move to Texas in 1833, they're not talking about a neat relocation with a U-Haul and a Starbucks break.
This is pack your life into wagons, pray the wheels don't explode, and hope nobody gets cholera. Moving.
Texas at that time is still Mexican territory, and it's unstable. Anglo-American settlers are streaming in, tensions are rising, and within a few years, Texas is in open revolt.
And Perry is basically a kid watching a storm form right over his home.
Exactly. And he's not just watching. He's pulled into it through family. He accompanies his father during major events of the Texas Revolution, like the Siege of Bear, and later, the Battle of San Jacinto.
San Jacinto, the big one, the short battle that basically decides the revolution. And this guy is there as a teenager.
A mere lad, as later writers like to say. He grows up in a world where a boy can be a witness to the making of a nation, and then, without any real transition, be expected to defend that nation with his own hands.
Imagine your middle school field trip is watch the birth of a republic, and then your after-school activity is scout hostile territory.
After the revolution, Texas doesn't become peaceful, it becomes Texas.
Which is a polite way of saying, it's a patchwork of settlements under pressure, constant raiding and retaliation, border conflicts, and a government that's often broke, improvised, and desperate.
And in that environment, the Texas Rangers become a kind of frontline institution, not the modern law enforcement organization people picture today, but a rough, semi-formal force. Part militia, part scouts, part frontier fighters.
A lot of them were basically freelancers with a badge, like, here's a horse, a gun, a vague mission, and a promise we might pay you later.
Perry joins young. In 1836, he serves in a ranger company under Captain William W. Hill for a few months, and he's involved in skirmishing. One mention places him in action around Yegwa Creek.
So while most teenagers are trying to figure out whether they're a hat person, he's trying to figure out whether the brush ahead contains a threat.
The frontier doesn't wait for you to become an adult. It makes the decision for you.
And then it charges you interest.
As he grows into his late teens and early 20s, Perry keeps serving. He's wounded in 1839 while serving under John H. Moore.
That name matters, because Moore is one of those Republic-era leaders who shows up whenever things get desperate. If you served under him and got wounded, you were in the thick of it.
Perry also scouts under different leaders, Samuel Highsmith, Thomas Green, and he's connected with expeditions like the Somerville expedition.
Which, for listeners, is part of that chaotic period where Texas keeps colliding with Mexico, and things like raids, reprisals, and political misadventures blur together.
Then we get to 1844, and this is the moment where Old Rufe becomes a legend.
Buckle up.
In the summer of 1844, John Coffee Hayes is commanding a company of Texas Rangers out of San Antonio. Hayes is one of the most famous Ranger captains. Aggressive, innovative, a tactician who understands speed, surprise, and the brutal math of frontier combat.
Hayes is like the frontier's answer to, what if leadership was just constant motion and danger?
He sends a small party of 4 men on a scout toward the Rio Grande region. The goal is to see if Mexican forces are threatening, and also to keep eyes on a landscape where raids can come out of nowhere.
And the party includes Christopher Kit Acklin, Cicero Rufus Rufe Perry, plus 2 others, John Carlton and James Dunn.
After about a week out, they stop near the Nueces River. It's midday, it's hot. 2 of them, Carlton and Dunn, go down to the river, strip, and start bathing.
Which sounds normal until you remember. This is the kind of normal where bathing is also temporarily being the world's most vulnerable target.
Meanwhile, Perry and Acklin are by the camp when a group of around 30 Comanches attacks. Suddenly, it's chaos. Yelling, charging, close combat.
30. That's not a few. You are now a statistic unless you do something heroic.
Perry and Acklin grab their weapons and fight while retreating toward the river, trying to link back up with their companions. They're experienced, they have nerve, but the odds are vicious.
And this is where the story turns from violent to, how are you alive?
Perry is hit by arrows. 3, according to one detailed account. 1 enters his temple, 1 hits his shoulder, another passes through his body from right to left.
I need everyone to stop and picture arrow enters temple. That's not an injury you walk off. That's not even an injury you typically remain in the living category with.
He collapses and faints from pain and blood loss. The attackers assume he's dead, but he regains consciousness and somehow gets himself to the riverbank.
This is the part in the movie where the soundtrack goes quiet, and you hear his breathing and a ringing in his ears.
One of the men from the river tries to get him onto a horse, but Perry is too weak to mount. So Perry grabs the horse's tail and holds on as it crosses the river.
That is such a specific kind of stubborn. Not I'll do my best, but I will physically cling to survival like it owes me money.
He gets across, climbs the bank, and faints again. His companions, also in desperate shape, believe he's dead or dying.
Meanwhile, Acklin is wounded badly too, several times, including an arrow lodged in his cheek he can't pull out.
Carlton and Dunn, naked, sunburned, desperate, ride hard and eventually reach San Antonio and report Perry and Acklin dead.
Which is reasonable, because arrow in the temple tends to be a pretty final-sounding situation.
But Perry isn't dead.
Because the frontier didn't get its pound of flesh yet.
When Perry comes to again, he staggers into brush. He pulls out some of the arrows, removes the ones he can reach, but can't extract the one embedded in his shoulder.
So he's walking around with an arrow still in him, which is, medically speaking, not recommended.
He tries to stop the bleeding with whatever he has: leaves, dust, improvised dressings. He's thirsty, so he crawls to the river and uses his shoes like cups.
Which is disgusting, but in a you are alive sort of way.
And then, this is the core of the legend, he starts moving towards San Antonio. The distance is described in the neighborhood of 110 to 120 miles, across wilderness.
Unarmed, wounded, no food, no water, with a hole through his head and an arrow in his shoulder.
He moves at night when he can, tries to shelter in shade, sleeps in fitful bursts, terrified that heat and injury will drive him delirious.
That detail is so human, not just fear of death, but fear of losing your mind. Because out there, delirium is a death sentence.
After days, 6 days of crawling, staggering, surviving on almost nothing, he reaches San Antonio on the 7th day in skeletal condition.
Imagine being in San Antonio, thinking 2 of your men died, and then a man walks in looking like a ghost with frontier grit in human form.
People embrace him, get him help, and the story spreads. And then, because this isn't finished, Acklin also survives, arriving a day later, also barely alive, still with the arrow stuck in his cheek.
This is the part where you realize the Rangers weren't just tough. They were operating in a different category of human endurance. Like their baseline expectations were set by myth.
Both men receive medical treatment. The arrows are extracted, they recover, though accounts suggest Perry never fully shakes the effects of that temple wound.
I would hope not. I stub my toe and bring it up for a week.
That 1844 escape becomes Perry's signature story, but it's not the only thing he does, and sometimes that gets lost. People hear the trek and think, okay, that's the whole biography. It isn't.
It's just the most cinematic chapter.
In 1845, he marries Margaret Ann Rousseau in Bastrop, and they go on to have 7 children.
Which in frontier terms is also a survival story. 7 kids? That's like running a small company.
Then comes the Mexican-American War. Perry enlists in a Texas Mounted Volunteer unit associated with Peter Hansborough Bell, and he serves roughly from late 1846 into 1847.
That war is huge for Texas Rangers' reputation. Their scouting and fighting styles become both famous and infamous. It's also where some of the Ranger myth begins to harden into legend.
Perry's service continues across decades. During the Civil War, he serves with mounted volunteers tied to Confederate units in his area.
And here's where we always pause for the reality check. People's Civil War service can be complicated and morally loaded, and we're not here to sand down those edges. It's part of the record. It's part of who he was and the world he lived in.
After the war, Texas doesn't magically become calm. In the 1870s, frontier violence continues. Raids, conflicts, and the state's attempt to impose order through organized ranger forces like the Frontier Battalion.
Which is basically the state admitting, we can't just hope this settles itself.
In 1873, Perry is present in the wider orbit of an event known as the Battle of Deer Creek, coming to assist a party led by Dan W. Roberts.
And then in 1874, Perry is appointed captain of Company D of the Frontier Battalion, with Roberts as his first lieutenant.
That's a late career leadership role. He's not just a survivor, he's an organizer, a commander, someone the system trusts.
Which is wild, when you remember the system back then was basically held together with leather straps and willpower.
There's also a description of Perry from contemporaries that sticks. He's described as tall, muscular, erect, a perfect specimen of strong young manhood, with dark hair and dark eyes, bright with intelligence and enthusiasm.
That is 19th century code for this guy looked like a hero in a painting.
And then there's the injury tally that gets repeated. 20 wounds from arrows and 7 from bullets across his career.
20 from arrows, 7 from bullets. That's not a resume, that's a pincushion with opinions.
He lives into the 1890s, dying in 1898 in the Johnson City area and being buried in a Masonic cemetery.
So, he spans eras. Born when the United States is still young, comes to Texas when it's contested ground, watches revolution, republic, statehood, war with Mexico, Civil War, Reconstruction, and the so-called closing of the frontier.
His life is practically a timeline of 19th century Texas violence and transformation.
Okay, but let's zoom out, because here's what I find fascinating about Perry. We talk about toughness like it's a personality trait, like some people are just built different.
But a lot of toughness is context. Perry grows up where survival requires competence. If you can't ride, shoot, navigate, endure heat, read the land, and make hard choices quickly, you don't get a second chance.
Which means the people who survive long enough to become old are basically the winners of a brutal selection process.
And Perry's 1844 ordeal is a case study in that. Let's break down what it actually requires without turning it into a list of 10 easy steps to survive an arrow to the head.
Step 1. Don't be shot with an arrow in the head. That's my survival tip.
But once it happens, he does a few crucial things. He stops bleeding as best he can. He stays near water long enough to manage thirst. He moves in a way that balances exposure and progress. He doesn't panic into a sprint that kills him. He doesn't stay put and hope rescue comes. He commits to movement.
And he manages fear. That's the big one. Because fear makes you do dumb things, like stand up too fast when you've lost blood, or run straight into open ground, or give up.
The account of gentle whispers urging him onward, memories of family, trust in God, that's not just poetic. That's what human beings do under extreme stress. They create a mental tether to life.
It's like your brain makes a rope and says, hold this, do not let go.
Exactly. And in a time where medicine is limited, where you don't have antibiotics, where infection is a constant threat, sheer will doesn't guarantee survival. But it can get you far enough that chance and help can finally meet you.
And then there's the community side. When he staggers into San Antonio, he's embraced, treated, cared for. The frontier is violent, but it's also dependent. People survive together.
Which complicates the lone hero myth. Perry's trek is solitary, yes, but his survival is completed by other people.
That's such a good point. Lone wolf stories always end with a pack.
Now, we also have to say out loud, the era Perry lived in was defined by conflict between settlers and native peoples, and those conflicts were devastating. The Ranger's story is inseparable from violence that helped push indigenous communities off land, broke ways of life, and escalated cycles of raids and retaliation.
Which means you can't tell Perry's story as pure hero tale without also acknowledging the broader tragedy and power struggle of expansion.
Right? Perry is a man shaped by his time, serving institutions and causes that are, from a modern view, morally complicated. But he's also a human being with a startling capacity to endure suffering.
And maybe that's where the evergreen part comes in. Not that we should replicate 19th century frontier violence, please do not, but that endurance, fear, loyalty, luck, community, those themes never go out of date.
So if you're listening this years from now, the details remain the details. But the human questions remain too. What do you do when you're hurt and alone? How do you decide to keep moving? What stories do people tell about you afterward, and what do they leave out?
Also, how do you become old Rufe and not that guy who probably died?
Step 1 again is don't die.
Step 2 is make sure somebody writes it down.
Speaking of which, Perry's story survives because it gets recorded in biographies, memoirs, and historical collections. And like all history, the way it's recorded shapes what becomes the legend.
For example, the distance. You'll see 110 miles in one telling, 120 in another. The core truth is the same. It's an obscene distance for a wounded man without supplies.
And that variation is a good reminder. History is often a photograph taken from slightly different angles. You get the same subject, but the edges shift.
But the arrow in the temple does not shift. That part is pretty vivid.
Let's talk about his later career for a moment, because we've been living in 1844 for a while.
It's hard not to. It's like someone survived a shark attack and then went on to have a long career in accounting. You're always going to lead with the shark.
Yet his appointment as a captain in the Frontier Battalion is significant. It shows that he isn't just a story people tell. He's someone trusted with leadership in a more formal phase of Ranger organization.
Which probably means he's known as steady, not flashy, dependable. The guy who doesn't collapse under pressure, because he already did that once, and it didn't take.
And there's something poignant about the arc. A young boy at the edges of revolution grows into a young man bleeding in a thicket by the Nueces, then into an older man tasked with imposing order on a state trying to become settled.
Like the frontier itself is aging alongside him.
He dies in 1898. By then, the Texas of his youth is gone. Railroads, towns, fences, telegraphs, new political realities.
But the myths remain. The Ranger image remains. And in those myths, old Rufe Parry is one of the faces.
So what do we do with a story like this? I think we hold it carefully. We can admire endurance without romanticizing the violence that produced it. We can tell the story without turning it into propaganda. And we can let it challenge our modern assumptions about what a human body and mind can withstand.
And we can also admit that if either of us got an arrow in the shoulder, we'd be like, I am, simply not built for this century.
I get a paper cut and write my will.
Tell my loved ones, I fought bravely against the envelope.
But that contrast is part of why we do this show. History reminds you how different daily life used to be, and how people adapted. Not because they were superheroes, but because they had to.
Parry didn't choose the era, but he chose to keep moving through it.
And that's the episode.
Before we go, a special thanks to everyone listening. Whether you've been with us since episode 1, or you just found us today, we genuinely appreciate you.
If you enjoyed this, please rate, subscribe, and share the podcast. And seriously, leaving a 5-star review helps the show grow more than you'd think.
Also, send us topic ideas on social media. We love building episodes around what you're curious about.
And check out the new merchandise. There's a link in the show notes.
And remember, our episodes are evergreen. Come back anytime, share them anytime. History doesn't expire.
Thanks for listening. See you next time on the History AI Podcast,
where we prove once again the past is wild, and somehow people survived it.
Down by the Sabine, where the cypress leans low, there's a name in the wind that the old folks know. Cicero Rufus, Perry rode out quiet, didn't boast or pray, just a man with a purpose at the break of day. Boots worn thin from the roads he claimed, didn't chase the glory, didn't need the fame, carried more than a saddle, more than a gun, carried the weight of what had to be done. It ain't always the loud ones that history keeps, sometimes it's the soul that rides while the whole world sleeps, with dust on his hands and truth in his stare. He carved out a life from the hot Texas air. No band, no crowd, no preacher's cry, just a man in the land beneath that sky. Yeah, the story still lingers where the red dirt swirl of a quiet kind of strength in a hard, wild world. He knew every bend where the river would turn, every lesson a man's got to live to learn. Didn't run from the fire, didn't bow to the storm, stood his ground when the times weren't warm. Folks still talk when the sun dips low about the deals he made and the seeds he'd sown. Not for gold, not for pride, not for name, just a steady hand in a shifting game. It ain't always the loud ones that history keeps, sometimes it's the soul that rides while the whole world sleeps, with dust on his hands and truth in his stare. He carved out a life from the hot Texas air. No band, no crowd, no preacher's cry, just a man in the land beneath that sky. Yeah, the story still lingers where the red dirt swirl of a quiet kind of strength in a hard, wild world. Time rolls on like a westbound train, names fade out in the dust and rain, but every now and then if you listen close, you'll hear that echo where the mesquite grows. It ain't always the loud ones that history keeps, sometimes it's the soul that rides while the whole world sleeps, with dust on his hands and truth in his stare. He carved out a life from the hot Texas air. No band, no crowd, no preacher's cry, just a man in the land beneath that sky. Yeah, the story still lingers where the red dirt swirl of a quiet kind of strength and a hard sun goes down slow for the ones who build what we